Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. Years back, I made a video asking, can black men build their own CIA? It's still a relevant question. Obviously, this video briefing is not going to be some how-to on building an intelligence agency, nor is it going to be a nuts and bolts on who's who either. This is about putting the subject on the table. This is about prioritizing protecting ourselves from white supremacist attacks through superior information. Black men are the thought leaders of our group, so if it's going to be, it must be us who leads this. Actionable intelligence is key to good group security. In July 2018, the Oath Keepers announced that they were going to hold a so-called rally in front of Congresswoman Maxine Waters' office. And yes, this is the exact same Oath Keepers terrorist group who stormed the Capitol last year and whose leader, the white Hispanic Stewart Rhodes, was just convicted of seditious conspiracy. Now, in this case, back in 2018, the Oath Keepers' plot was to terrorize Maxine Waters. But that was foiled due to the community having turned out as a group and putting these Oath Keepers on notice that they were not going to allow white supremacy to be the order of the day. But my question is, where was our intelligence operation at to surveil the Oath Keepers for ourselves, to monitor their movements for ourselves, so that we would know who they're talking to and who they're associating with? We have to stop making excuses for why we shouldn't or don't need to do this, because we do. The excuse makers are always claiming, well, we can't get close to these white supremacists anyway. I mean, how are we supposed to get into these white supremacist organizations? We can't get close to these guys. That's a lie. These white supremacists have black people around them all the time. Doesn't matter if it's the Oath Keepers, the 3%ers, the alt-right, whomever. They love having themselves some black mascots around. What they don't have is one of ours in there. And that's because we haven't made it a point to get one of ours in there. Now, we got all these other anti-black racists out there, of every stripe, pattern, and spot, and they believe in infiltrating our groups and organizations with their folks, and we just let them go ahead and do that. And then we wonder how it is that the FBI always has an up-to-date dossier complete with recordings on everything that we're doing. We need to understand that nobody's going to give us permission to protect ourselves. So stop asking. And when we talk about intelligence gathering, please get out of your mind some James Bond, Jack Ryan fantasy where you're going to have some huge multi-story facility where you're going to be having a bunch of computer rooms and all that stuff. Believe it or not, some of the best intelligence gathering out there is usually comprised of a few very smart, very clever individuals sitting at their desks. That's part of the reason why I brought up the whole scam baiting thing. Those guys are not some big, huge organization, but what they are is organized. And that's the reason why I keep bringing up Gideon's spies so much with the birth of the Mossad. You see, the reason that the efforts of the Jewish residents in Palestine a century ago were successful, not merely at establishing the state of Israel, but making sure that they had the means to protect themselves, was because they were organized long before there was an Israel. They recognized the need for intelligence gathering long before they had a state to protect them. You see, the intelligence gathering came first. The capability of having a state to protect them came second. One leads to the other. They didn't go to the British, who were the occupying power in Palestine at the time. They turned to each other. They also didn't retreat behind defeatist talk about being outnumbered. There's another popular one that black folks like to run to. In the case of the Israelis, their adversaries had them outnumbered, but they had their adversaries outclassed. And wasn't that one of the many lessons of the uprisings of 2020? In 2020, people weren't making excuses about being outnumbered. They were facing an existential crisis, and they faced it down by putting the excuses aside. Superior numbers mean nothing if those numbers are cowardly or idiotic. Intelligence gathering requires resources, and it must be resources that you own. It also requires organization, to train and equip young people to get the best and brightest minds possible to evaluate the information and make sure it gets into the hands of people who can actually use it. And you also need means of counterintelligence to protect your own intelligence apparatus. And another episode from the whole Middle Eastern conflict that's very instructive is the Munich Olympics. For those of you who don't know, in 1972, you had some Palestinians who abducted and killed the Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympics. The Israelis responded to this attack by having a group of Mossad agents go all around the world, finding all of the Palestinians responsible for the attack and taking them out. Now, there was one scene in the movie where you had the head of this Israeli unit, played by Eric Bana, and he was talking to a Mossad quartermaster who was giving him information about his marching orders, where to get the secret bank accounts so that he can get more money, and how to communicate with home headquarters and all that. But at the end of the scene, the quartermaster told Eric Bana that the hit squad needed to keep all of the receipts of their expenses, because, as he put it, whatever you're doing, someone else is paying for it. Now, as I explained, the entire reason that operation was even necessary was because the Palestinians, who had been taking it on the chin for quite a while, pulled off this daring attack on the Israeli athletes at the 1972 Munich Olympics. How did the Palestinians even manage to pull off an operation like that? It shocked the world, because the Israelis had no idea that it was going to happen. They had no idea that the Palestinians were planning it. I say that because I don't want anyone thinking that I'm putting the Israelis on a pedestal or saying that they're the only ones who could have pulled it off, even though I've made it very clear that I'm not saying that. I'm saying it because I'm trying to point out that even the Palestinians, who also did not have a tradition of intelligence gathering, they nonetheless showed that in time they were able to pick it up. They didn't have the same resources the Israelis had. By the 1970s, the Israelis were well fortified with U.S. government funding. My point is that a number of groups have had to develop their own intelligence gathering, analysis, and utilization capabilities. And, as I pointed out in yesterday's briefing, it's not just governments or even big multinational corporations who can do it. It can be done with small groups of people, if they are organized and motivated. One thing that the movie Munich dramatized is that those Israeli hitters were not some expert group of operatives, at least not at first. They made mistakes. On one occasion, they almost blew themselves up. And at least 2 of their team members were killed by enemy spies. This is important because one of the bad habits we're going to have to drop is this urge to quit. Some of us are always looking for an excuse to quit the fight. And for these people, the first time things get rough, or when we suffer a setback, that's their cue to declare defeat and then go back to smoking weed and watching World Star Hip Hop full time. When people are of one accord, they turn to each other instead of turning on each other. We need to know where these white supremacists are and what they're up to. Dylan Roof bragged about being part of an online terrorist cell, so who else was in his group? We still don't know. And here black people are demanding that the same police who moseyed up to his car and took him to Burger King also do something about his terrorist pals. As we've seen in Minneapolis with the 4chan terrorists and with Kyle Rittenhouse, the police are mobbed up with these terrorists. I keep telling you about the 4chan terrorist who attacked Black Lives Matter in Minneapolis and how it was black people who led the effort to break up that terrorist attack. It's to make the point to you that it's not just something that the Israelis can do, or former presidents and prime ministers who have their own quote-unquote investment firm that deals in intelligence gathering, or some suburbanite males who get together so that they can stop scam artists in India from fleecing people, usually their relatives. I want to point out that black people can and have done the exact same things, and we need to intensify our efforts and make them more persistent. In the case of the 4chan terrorist, they posted a video online of themselves gearing up and planning their attack. That was on a Thursday. They then went to the protest line and did what they called recon. They were familiarizing themselves with the area and with the people who were there. The plan had been to return to the protest line on the following Monday, commit some act of mass shooting, and force the demonstrators to disperse. They were going to break up the protest as they saw it. Well, the only thing that got broken up were the terrorists. Because they didn't know that their would-be victims had seen the video that they made of themselves on Thursday. And those black protesters made a note of who these clowns were, what clothing they wore, and what they looked like. That's why when those creeps came back on the following Monday, they had no idea they were walking into a trap. The black protesters surrounded them, demanded that they take off their masks, and when they didn't, the protesters moved them away from the protest line. They didn't get on them right then that moment. Instead, it's like, let's herd these guys over here so we can deal with them personal-like. And then they proceeded to neutralize the white supremacist threat. Those protesters rolled out the welcome wagon and rolled it right over the terrorists. These 4chan white supremacist pieces of trash, these guys clearly had been playing lots of Call of Duty and imagined themselves to be operators, as in Special Forces operators. In fact, they like to use the acronym OAF, which stands for Operator as the F word. Well, actually, oaf is completely accurate because it describes them to a T. But that night, they ran into real soldiers. And these white supremacists, they weren't operator as F, they were scared as F. The corrupt police who sent them were completely unable to help them. Those terrorists wound up running for their lives, but they didn't get far. They were arrested, convicted, and sent to prison. The police didn't stop that terrorist attack. The black people who were there did. Forewarned is forearmed. But you can't sit back waiting for somebody else to give you the warning. You got to get that for yourself. But understand something. Those 4chan terrorists in Minneapolis 7 years ago, they were there at the behest of the Minneapolis police.
We believe the police department is facilitating the injustice, bullying to the protesters, and we also believe that they are involved in this shooting. We know from blackboards and from chat rooms and also videos that we have posted on our website that police that are from different counties, police from different districts have come down to entice the protesters, have come down to bully the protesters.
I understand you are there in Minneapolis and you know much more about this, but those are serious allegations you are just laying down on national television.
And we are standing behind it. We do not back down from these allegations. Bob Crow.
Where is your evidence that they were involved in the shooting?
So we know that when the incident happened, police were lurking over the top of the precinct. Immediately once the victims were shot, protesters ran to the door of the precinct and they knocked on the door for help, for ambulance. The police came out and one officer said, "This is what you've been wanting," and shut the door on us. It took 15 minutes for the police to even arrive, and shortly after that, they began to mace the crowd. So if you are not a part of the problem, if this is not something that you're trying to cover up, why would you not attend to victims that pay for your salaries?
Now, of course, you had the resident racist over at CNN, Brooke Baldwin, who's no longer there and I would imagine is no longer employable. But she was trying to do her cheap skepticism routine and asking, what concrete evidence do you have? Well, as it turned out, the protesters had also cornered another suspect who ran off.
So what's going on right now?
Okay, this guy right here walking away was a white supremacist. He walked in a crowd of 6 or 7 black men. And he started calling the N-word. I knew that, I kind of figured that he was a white working a provocateur. So I told the brothers, don't do nothing to him, just, let him go. So I told one guy to follow him. And when they followed him, this is what they saw. This is them following him. And then the second video will show him go walk right up into a police car that was waiting on him.
All right. And this happened the night of the vigil?
Yes.
Okay.
Do they show the police car?
Yeah.
Alright, that's the first video. That's the first video. We're going to take the second video when the person gets into the vehicle with I heard the state trooper.
Here's the second one. He's kneeling down. He just got in the back of the police car.
How many suspects are?
They almost ran him over.
It's
earlier.
right here. Oh yeah, I believe that's the car that was connected.
Yeah, I can see that.
He was in a regular car, but he had on a state trooper uniform.
I thought he was in the state trooper car.
So this happened on Wednesday, where somebody who was coming in and saying racial slurs against people was escorted by the community back out, and he was escorted. He went back to a vehicle with a police officer in it and got into the back seat.
Okay.
And so, okay.
And we believe that the police was waiting for him.
For these people who came tonight?
No, we believe the police was waiting for this dude.
The protesters followed this one, and he walked a couple of blocks and jumped right into the back of an unmarked police car. And who was at the wheel but a Minnesota state trooper in uniform? So the police's fingerprints were all over this one. The 4chan terrorist in Minneapolis bragged about having cops as their friends. After the attack, the leader of the terrorist cell, Scarcella's first call was to one of his police buddies. Now, if you had just taken part in a mass shooting, a pre-planned terrorist attack, and you knew that the attack failed and now the authorities would be looking for you, why would your very first call be to a cop? Because that's who he was carrying out this attack on the behalf of. But those terrorists were forced to run away with their tail between their legs and they ran straight into prison. And as for that police precinct house, it got closed down. So you had the regular forces of white supremacy, the police, having sent their pals, these gun-toting racist punks, in to do their dirty work. But it blew up in their faces and ended in a humiliating loss. And don't you know these white supremacists online are still salty about that? Oh, there's still a few of them who actually watch some of the videos pertaining to the failed 2015 terrorist attack, and they're just mad. How could they have put them in jail? Very easily, it seems. The bad guys took a huge L with that one, and since white supremacists are cowards, when we put our foots in their behinds, they remember it, and it scars their withered little souls. But there's also another parallel to the Minneapolis terrorist attack: Kyle Rittenhouse. I don't want you to think that what happened with him was somehow separate from this or some sort of anomaly that had nothing to do with Minneapolis. Both Minneapolis and Kenosha are in the Midwest. In fact, it's only about a 5-hour drive that separates Minneapolis and Kenosha. As I've always taught you, nothing happens in a vacuum under white supremacy. These prosecutors in Kenosha and that judge, they knew about those 4chan terrorists. They knew that some white supremacist punks had pulled the same stunt as Rittenhouse had, and especially that judge in particular was determined to make sure they wouldn't take an L this time. They were like, forget it, we're just throwing the doggone law out, we're not doing anything. So you had Kyle Rittenhouse who pulled the exact same stunt as the 4chan terrorist in Minneapolis. And just like with those 4chan terrorists, Kyle Rittenhouse had his pals in the police who were standing back while they let him do the dirty work. And then they came in, oh, has he done the job yet? Okay, good. Well, in that case, then he can just go home then. But ultimately, the entire point of intelligence gathering is to enable you to be proactive. Minneapolis was a great moment, but we don't want to stop there. We want to stop the next 4chan terrorists before they can strike. The Black Panther Party's full name was the Black Panther Party for Self-Defense, and the operative term in self-defense is self. No one is going to secure your safety for you. We have to get comfortable with protecting ourselves in whatever ways we find necessary. And stop letting people slither among us making excuses and saying, well, what's the dominant society going to do to it? We can't do that. Why, look at these police. They're going to do something to us if we try. History has shown that when we stand up, the enemy backs down. That was one of the lessons of 2020. That which the enemy cannot defeat, they have no choice but to accept. However, the first people who need to accept something is us. We have to accept responsibility for our own security, carry the implements of personal protection, and make it a point to pursue the information of group protection. Do it because it's right. Do it because it works. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors: Latrice Ross, David Butler, Paul Taylor, Ikekas B. Dorset, and Nora Brown. Salute to them, and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.